Hello. Hey, everybody. As promised, I am here with you answering questions about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I'm James Gunn. I'm the writer and director of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and also Volume 1. And I thought I've been waiting to answer questions too in-depth about the movie because I don't want to give away spoilers. And as you know, there are a lot of things in this movie that are spoilers. And so I didn't want to give everything away before it opened up in Japan this weekend. But now that it's opened up in Japan, this is for people who really want to know things about the insides of the making of the film, what happened, what does something mean, what does something not mean, et cetera, et cetera. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, please don't watch the rest of this Q&A session. Just hold on and wait to watch it later at some other time. All right. Thank you. I'm getting lots of, who did the motion capture for Groot? Devin Colson asks. That is me. All of that dancing at the beginning of the film is mine. I also did sessions where I acted, I did all of Groot's emotions and looks throughout the movie, which isn't very much because he's very Buster Keaton-esque in that he doesn't show many expressions. But I also did a pass for that as well. But really, a lot of the animation comes down to our great animators who did the movie. Frame Store, they add things to it, who did the opening sequence, and Weta, who does Groot at the end, and all the other fine companies we worked with. Will we see a bigger role in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 with the original group under Stakar? So, as many of you know, and again, spoiler warning, there's going to be lots of spoilers here. At the end of the movie, in one of our post-credit scene, we see Stakar and his group of Ravagers. That group of Ravagers is a version of the original group of Guardians of the Galaxy. It's Kruger, and that's the pronunciation of that character's name, who's a sort of sorcerer from another planet. He's a race of Lems, and I know his pronunciation because Jim Valentino wrote me, the creator, the other day. And Charlie 27, played by Ving Rhames. Michelle Yeoh plays Alita, who is Stakar's wife. And Mainframe, played by Miley Cyrus, who's a disembodied head. And, of course, Martinix, played by my friend Michael Rosenbaum. People are asking me, are they going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? This is a spoiler-filled Q&A about Guardians Volume 2, more so than Volume 3. So I'm going to leave that to the imagination, but we'll see what happens. I'm just in the middle of writing Volume 3 right now, so who knows exactly what's going to happen. George Harrison was a writer who would talk about the flaws of self-importance. Did he have any influence on using his music on Ego's Planet? I mean, listen, I just love George Harrison. That's one of my favorite albums of all time. I think he's amazing, and I think the song is perfect. I think that it reflects on a lot of George Harrison's spiritual beliefs, and strangely, Ego's origin story is sort of, has some elements of Hindu creation myths in it. So I liked that song for that reason, more so than George Harrison's writings outside of that song. Why did Ego tell Peter he killed Meredith? What was he going to get out of telling him? So, Ego is a very complicated character. I think that Ego, and really the whole movie, is about Ego. This is true. It's about Ego's taking over. Because he, on some level, he wants to have a connection with his son. And also he is sort of, he thinks in that moment that Peter understands what it takes to be a conqueror. And in that moment, he shares. He is blind. He is not very good with, he thinks he's really good at social interactions. There's my cat joining me. She's going to come up and rub my belly during this. But he's hoping. He wants to have some sort of connection with Peter. And when Peter betrays that and shoots him, he then says, I'll just use him for, like I've used so many others in my existence. People are asking Infinity War stories. Again, I will spoil stuff about Guardians Volume 2, but I will not spoil stuff about Infinity Wars. But let me say that the Guardians do have an important part in Infinity War. They are supporting players. It is an Avengers movie, but I think that they're really cool in it. What drives you to pick the music you do? Are there any songs you wanted to use and for some reason couldn't for both movies? No. Dave Jordan's my music supervisor. Every single song I've ever asked for, he's gotten me, including some very difficult ones, some difficult dealings, and that's been great. I choose the music first and foremost for story. I know these are soundtracks that are very popular in CD form that people listen to in iTunes, but for me, it's all about what fits best in the film, and that's what I go for. And all the songs are written into the screenplay from the very beginning. Why did Ego look human in the interactions he had with the other species he wished to impregnate? I mean, wouldn't he take the shape of the species in question? Yes, and I believe he did. This is getting pretty in-depth, but I believe that when Ego is showing Peter those statues are created for Peter, so that he wasn't, for instance, when Ego made love to a turtle creature, which we see in the background, him, sort of smooching with the turtle creature. He was probably in the shape of a turtle creature when he went to that planet. But for the sake of storytelling, both our storytelling with the audience and Ego's storytelling to Peter, we made him look human in those situations. I found that in telling Ego's story, it's not that complicated of a story, but it gets complicated very easily. So I like to keep things as simple as possible. Hello from Puerto Rico, James. Where is Nathan Fillion's cameo? Is it going to be in the Blu-ray release? Here is the thing. There is no Nathan Fillion cameo, and there never was a Nathan Fillion cameo. What happened was we had in the scene where Ego's life form starts destroying St. Charles, Missouri. We had a theater that said, it was a little Easter egg. There were tons of Easter eggs on that street, which I'll post at some point because a lot of them didn't make the movie. But one of the Easter eggs was on a theater. It said Simon Williams Film Festival. Simon Williams, as you Marvel fans might know, is Wonder Man in the comics, and it said Simon Williams Film Festival, and then on the outside there were a bunch of movie posters from different supposed Simon Williams movies, including Stark, which is like the Tony Stark version played by Simon Williams. And in those posters, just only in those posters, Nathan Fillion was Simon Williams. There was no scene with Simon Williams. He never did anything else but that. That was all it was. Now, people went on set and they were taking pictures from across the street, as of course they're going to do, as we were doing all these stunts on that scene. And they got these pictures of Simon Williams Film Festival, and then they assumed that Simon Williams was going to be in the movie. So all these articles came out that Nathan Fillion was cast as Wonder Man. Nathan Fillion's name was on IMDb as playing Wonder Man and being one of the stars of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for a long time. So that's what happened. Things got out of control. And at that point, I wasn't, at a certain point, I can't be going around saying this isn't true and this is true, because sometimes people say things that are true, and I don't want to, have that spoiled as well. Okay. Do the colors you pick for the scenes have meaning, or are they just aesthetics? Can you give some of the meanings away? Well, I wouldn't say necessarily meaning. The one thing, a lot of times in the Guardians movies, especially in the first Guardians movie, yellow is life. And the color yellow is an incredibly important color in the Guardians of the Galaxy. But in the second film, Really, the colors have more to do with mood, and as some of you know, I pick swatches after I write the screenplay. I pick swatches for each scene of what colors will be in that scene, and they were much more specific and even simple colors in the second movie, even though it seems much more colorful and much more bursting than the first film. There were actually fewer colors in it because we just kind of went all full-on candy store in the first movie. And in the second movie, we chose colors very specifically. And I want those stories in and of themselves to tell a story. If you can look at those color swatches on a wall, I want that to tell a story as well as the screenplay. Oh my God, so many questions. I'm so sorry, guys. You know. Was there ever a draft of Volume 2 where Thanos was going to appear? No. I never put Thanos in Volume 2. I think Thanos is going to get plenty of screen time in the next Avengers movie, and I didn't think that this movie was about that. It is important to me that the Guardians movies, although these three films will be considered a trilogy, and they do tell one overriding story, but that the primary purpose of them is to be individual films that work as individual films. Did you have Andy Park and the rest of the concept artists give their ideas for Volume 2, or did you help them with the choice? Not sure what that means. Andy Park is the head of our Viz Dev, visual development team, and everything they do is guided by me. So yes, I tell them exactly what to draw. And, not what to draw. They draw from their own wonderful imaginations, but I tell them what characters to choose, that I choose, and then basic ideas about how I think they should look and what they should look like. And then they go and they take that and they work on that and they bring it back, and I give them notes, and then they go back and they bring back more and then they give notes. And sometimes you can go see Andy Park, posted a beautiful piece of work that he did on Mantis, an early version of Mantis. But Mantis was yellow and she looks more bug-like. But we tried it out in prosthetics and it didn't work. Sometimes you have a painting that looks beautiful, and I see this all the time when people post their original art for the concept artist, that people go, oh my God, that looks amazing. Well, it does look amazing because it defies gravity. It's not on a real human's face. It doesn't work exactly like it does in reality. And in that case, we tried to do that Mantis version, but it just didn't work, and it looked strange. And what happens is when you're using a person's real face and you have partial appliances on it, it gets a little old sometimes because it looks exactly like it is. Like you're using a human being's face and then having appliances here or appliances here or appliances here, like, so many characters have looked like for so many years, and it gets boring to me. Same thing with the color of Mantis, of making her a different color. Making her green, I didn't want to do that because of, Gamora and Hulk and other characters. I didn't want to make her yellow because it seemed strange to paint someone just a different color among this whole group of characters and have everybody be a different color except for Peter Quill. I thought it was more interesting to use the original Mantis from the comics, where you see her skin color, or, where she has human colored skin. Are you contributing to the Guardians characters' involvement in the next Avengers movie? Yes, very, very, very much so. Was there ever talk of Robert Downey Jr. making a cameo as Tony Stark? No, there was not. What's the hardest part about directing Bradley Cooper's voice performance? Really, Bradley was really amazing on this movie. It was much easier than on the first movie. Like all of the other performers, he upped his game a lot. So he's really one of the easier people to direct. I believe in the Groot post-credit scene, Peter Quill could understand Groot calling him boring. Will other Guardians besides Rocket be able to understand Groot in the next film? Peter Quill obviously does understand adolescent Groot at the end of the movie. And other minor misconception is people think that's teen Groot at the end of the movie. I understand why. It's actually adolescent Groot. I would call him tween Groot, or we call him adolescent Groot. He's not quite a teenager yet. And yes, Peter Quill can't understand him. As for other Guardians, we'll have to wait and see. Is my brother going to have a larger role in the future as Kraglin? He did a kick-ass job in Volume 2. He's amazing. Sean's incredible in the film, especially his salute at the end I love. Yeah, Kraglin will continue to have a big role in the Guardians movies. I love the Guardians. Remember, there's spoilers in here, lots of spoilers. I love that question. I love the Guardians. I was so sad about Yondu. I didn't want to cry in a theater. And, I think it's okay to cry in a theater. I think it's great. There's no problem with that. I get weepy every time that happens. There's a couple of things in the movie that make me weepy. When Yondu dies and touches his son's face, I get weepy when at the end of the movie you can see when Gamora hugs Nebula and you just see her little Nebula's hand just kind of reach around and sort of hug her back for just a moment. You realize that's probably the closest she's ever known to an embrace in her entire life, or at least since she was a baby. And then at the end with the fireworks and the Rocket's reaction to that. So the dancing Groot opening scene, that was also you. Yes, that was me dancing in the opening, 100%. Very, very much. Did getting to know the actors impact the way you wrote the characters? Absolutely it did. I wrote Peter Quill. I wrote them all differently because I knew the actors. Some of it was a little bit tailored to the actor. I found that, Dave Bautista talked a lot like a thesaurus in the first film, and that didn't totally suit his performance style, which was so rough and ready and raw and funny. And so I simplified the way he talked a little bit. And the rest of the characters, I just kind of wrote for them. I would laugh really hard when Draft would do his big laugh in the first movie, which just came out of nowhere for me. And so adding that into the second movie as more of an element was important. How did you decide to have Ego as Peter's father and not Jason like in the comics? I do not like Jason or Jason. I just don't like the character very much. I also thought it was too much like a Star Wars thing because of the royalty and all of that. I knew before I started the first movie who the basics of Peter's father were. I knew that he was a celestial being who was up to absolutely no good, that he could appear as a being of light, and that he had tricked Yondu into delivering his children to him. And when Yondu found out what was occurring, he kept Peter Quill. That is something that, and also that, and so those are kind of the essentials that I knew. I actually knew all those things before I knew that it was going to be Ego. It wasn't until a little bit later that I thought what Marvel character could fit those requirements and be that character, and to me it was Ego. So I just thought it was a much more out there, crazy, interesting idea than just being some sort of king that wears looks like a Navy uniform. Yeah, that's probably negative. I'm sorry. Will you or Sean be joining Michael Rooker at Salt Lake Comic-Con? I don't know. Maybe Sean is. I don't know. What was the decision process for choosing Stakar, Alita, Charlie 27, Mainframe, Kruger, and Martin X as the original Guardians? It really was just, that was the only post-credit scene, I think, that was written after I had shot the rest of the movie. I shot that in post. I woke up one morning and I was thinking, oh my God, I would love to see those guys together at the end of the movie, sort of forming an even more messed up screwy version of the Guardians who are even less heroic than the Guardians are, and that are also even weirder. And so I think I think that Alita is not so Charlie 27 is obvious, Martinix is obvious. They were two of the original Guardians of the Galaxy. Alita, I thought, was an interesting character. Mainframe is male. I thought she could be very interesting as this big, tough, this robot head that could go and do on a lot of other things, and but it talks like like Miley Cyrus. And then Kruger, I just thought, was even weirder than Rocket and Groot, and could be a really cool character. So that was my decision process. It really was just me, lying in bed and thinking about who those characters could be. Oh my God, so many questions! Was Miley Cyrus really in the film? Yeah, she plays the voice of Mainframe at the very end of the movie. Anyone know how to change IMDb to be the right people? Because there's a bunch of people that are listed in IMDb that are not in the movie. Was Ego... Oh, yeah. Was Peter Ego's last child to have been delivered, or are there more out there somewhere? Well, I think that's something to think about. I just got home from seeing the film with my son. Best Mother's Day ever, Larissa says. Thank you. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. I'm doing this on Mother's Day. Very strange. What influenced your decision to have the Sovereign in the film if Ego is the main villain? Really, it was just about the story. It was the way it opened up. We needed to have a pushing force, which is the Sovereign, because really, the thing about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is it really is an independent film in the body of a spectacle film. That is, everything about it is 100% character-oriented, character-related. I really don't think that there's been another, spectacle film that has been so character-oriented. The middle of the movie is all about the relationships between the characters, and it really isn't about a villain overtaking everything. The villain overtaking everything is, in some ways, a subplot at the end that's less important than all the other things that Ego is doing, which is that he's killed Peter's mother and that he's going to kill his friends. And so creating this film that was so character-oriented, where each of the characters we learn something about, each of the characters changes in some way, with the possible exception of Drax, who stays kind of the same. Each of the characters changes. I needed to focus on that, and so I needed to have some exterior force that was pushing us forward at least a little bit into the adventure, and that is what Elizabeth Debicki as Aisha, who I love, that's her purpose. I also do love the character of Adam Warlock, and in my original draft of the movie, Adam Warlock was a major character. I ended up taking out Adam Warlock because there were simply too many characters. As I said, I need to have each character have their own specific story that was important to the plot. And when I added one extra major character like that, it was just too many. I naturally am drawn to ensemble films, which is what Guardians is. Guardians Volume 2 more so than Guardians 1. Guardians Volume 1 is really, truly Peter Quill's movie, and the other characters are supporting, players. In this movie, it's truly is a multi-protagonist film in that Peter, Rocket, and Gamora are the stars of each of their own stories, and then the other characters sort of revolve around that. So anyway, that was a long explanation. In Volume 1, Nebula tells Gamora that of their siblings, she hated her the least. Are we going to meet the other siblings in Volume 3? Well, again, that's a Volume 3 spoiler, but I think it's a great thing to point out. Would I direct a Shang-Chi movie? Not necessarily. Guardians 2 was the first movie in the MCU which had such emotions. Yeah, I think that emotions were what this movie is about. I think that it is about these characters who are all broken angels and don't have any way of communicating with each other. I relate to the movie very, very much in that way. It's a very personal film in that way, and that I can have a difficulty relating to other people. Will there be a romance between Mantis and Drax? No. There is absolutely no romance between Mantis and Drax. They are BFFs. There is nothing romantic in there. I think we make that profoundly clear in the film. So for you to think there's romance between Mantis and Drax, I think you're kind of hoping outside of what we very clearly say. He's not attracted to her. The truth is, Drax is attracted to very heavy-set women. That's what he likes, and he absolutely doesn't like Mantis. In the highly emotional ending, did you think a joke from Drax was an important buffer? Asked Paul. I don't think of it like that. I mean, listen, it's a thing in the Guardians movies that we have a bunch of really emotional stuff happening and then something funny happens. That's a Guardians movie. It's also probably just my natural way of being. I'm very emotional, but then, I cover it all up with a joke. So I think that is part of it. But I also think that each of those moments with each of those characters was very specific and true to each of those characters. So, we see the moment, for instance, with Drax taking baby Groot and cuddling him at the end. And that's after we've seen this entire movie where Drax has, and baby Groot has been punching Drax throughout the whole movie. I don't know if you notice it, but they seem to hate each other. And Drax calls him a dumber, smaller Groot. He just doesn't seem to like him. But at the end, who does baby Groot choose to go to? It's Drax. We have the moment between Gamora and Peter Quill. Some people have asked, why not have that result in a kiss? The truth is because that's not who Gamora is. She is not someone who is going to just give in to the moment of a lustful, passionate moment. That's just not who she is. But what she did do is she loves Peter Quill. That's very obvious at the end of the movie. And she admits that to him. And their love is based on something much deeper than sex. It's based on a profound friendship between the two of them, that they are the heads of this family in a lot of ways. So each of those characters has a special moment. And I think it makes sense that one of Drax's special moments at the end is the fact that he's funny. He doesn't mean to be funny, but he is. Why does Ego have to kill his offspring that don't have the light? Simply because he's covering up his tracks. He doesn't want people to know what's going on. How long did the Michael Rooker Yondu makeup take to put on? I think it's about 3 or 4 hours. Do I think Gamora didn't have much of her own storyline? What? What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Gamora's storyline is everything in Peter Quill's story leads up to Gamora's storyline. We think that Nebula and Gamora in the pack in the last movie, that Nebula's the bad guy and Gamora's the good guy. In this movie, we learn that Gamora is the transgressor. She's the older bully sister. She has been unspeakably cruel to her sister, Nebula, and we understand why Nebula doesn't like her. Their story and their relationship with each other is the crux of the movie in so many ways. In fact, when Peter Quill talks about what the funeral means to him, that isn't the end of that. That leads to the story between Nebula and Gamora. So I think that's absolutely crazy to say that. Any special effect that didn't come out the way you wanted or took too many passes and nearly drove you crazy? Lots of things took too many passes. Listen, I'm always harshest with Rocket, with the way Rocket talks and looks, and I go through many passes of Rocket getting him to look right, because oftentimes he starts to look jerky and that's not what I want. He looks like an animatronic being sometimes, and so I really try to make his movements more fluid and his mouth work well to say words. But there's still many shots in the movie I look at and I go, oh my God, I wish we had another couple months to work on that shot. I liked how Peter Quill becomes sort of a father figure to the young Groot after he realizes how much of a father figure Yondu was to him. That's one of my favorite moments in the movie also, and I think it's an important one. Because I think that when, if you notice all of the characters and their relationships to Baby Groot, they have varying degrees of closeness. Rocket and Baby Groot are very close. Gamora and Baby Groot are very close. Rocket is not always the best dad, but he's there for him. Drax, we think, has got a problem, but he has a pretty intense relationship with Baby Groot. They're just always punching each other. Peter Quill utterly, almost completely ignores Baby Groot throughout the entire movie. This is important. I think that Peter Quill is, in many ways, a completely absent father to this son that they have on board, and I think Baby Groot's situation is the opposite of mine. I had 6 kids in my family and 2 parents. Baby Groot is one kid with many parents. And so I think at the end of the film, Peter Quill gets this Zune from Yondu, and he sits down to play it, and he's going to have a self-reflective moment for himself, like he did at the end of the first movie with his mother. The first movie's about mothers, the second movie's about fathers. And as he starts to listen to the music, instead of it being a moment that is selfish, Baby Groot crawls into his lap, and as we see Peter Quill looking down at Baby Groot, we see a father's love for his son. And it is a very unselfish moment on the part of Peter Quill, where a moment that was completely about him and his relationship to his father now becomes about his son and passing it on to the next generation and being a part of that. And so that's why that moment is so important to me in the movie and why it's so important for the development of Peter Quill. I really think the Guardians movie should have had Baby Groot and Pot for some of the movie and growing to full-size Groot like in the Disney Ultimate Spider-Man series. Well, I am sorry. I don't even know what that is, first of all. But Baby Groot is much different in the MCU, and everyone has ideas about what they think they should do differently. But, you can write your own movies, guys. I love how strong you've made the female characters. Thank you for making them something more than superficial. Thank you. I like those characters a lot. I can say that those are some of my favorite characters in the movie. And I love Mantis. Did you anticipate just how much the Rocket and Yondu characters would touch audiences in the film? Especially the scene of them face to face, revealing they are the same. I do. I think I did in some ways. I mean, it touched me a lot writing that sequence. I think that Rocket is someone who hasn't had any parental influence whatsoever, and I think Yondu serves that purpose for him. I think that their relationship in the movie is an incredibly profound one and a deep one. I wrote that scene, and it was hard to direct. Actually, it was something where I had to keep pushing Rooker harder and harder and harder and harder. But I think it ended up being probably the best acting performance in the movie in that scene. He's really truly amazing in the film. Was there never Am I going to allow Michael Rooker on set for Volume 3? Sure, I'll allow him back to come and visit. In fact, he wanted to come over here today. He's been texting me a lot before this and surprise you guys, but it was getting too late for him to come over. The scene where Mantis puts her hand on Drax's shoulder and she feels his pain is the most powerful scene in the whole movie, in my opinion. It's a wonderful scene. Pom Klementieff was amazing in that scene, as was Dave Bautista, and I love that scene a lot. Was it always intended to have Guardians 2 follow right behind Guardians 1 in terms of time, where 3 will be set years afterwards with, with changes, perhaps? I think that, was it always like that? I don't think I always chose to do that. I think that really it was when I started working on Volume 2 and I learned that I thought the characters had so much to learn in such a short time, and that the bumps of being in these intimate relationships that they just committed to in the first film were going to be more interesting and more dramatic at the very beginning than they would be down the line. And I didn't want to skip over that maturing of the relationships between them. And I also thought it would be fun to have Groot be little. At first, when I started working on the movie, I had Groot bigger, and it seemed repetitive from the first film, and it didn't give him as much to do. So I like the idea of baby Groot being in there. What was your reasoning for having Groot become a teen at the end? What made you choose teenage Groot over adult Groot, and why kill Yondu? All right, first one's easy. I love the idea of being able to grow with these characters, to see them change little by little over time, and that's why I made him not teen Groot at the end, but adolescent Groot. He's not a teenager yet. He's still a young older boy. And I don't want to just go back to what we had before. And let's remember, Baby Groot's a different character than Groot from the first movie. He doesn't have his memories. He's developing. He obviously has some personality differences from the first Groot. So it's not going to be him just becoming adult Groot from the first movie. He's becoming his own Groot. Why kill Yondu? Let me tell you, there's nothing harder for me than the choice to kill Yondu in this movie. Michael Rooker, for all the crap I give him, is one of my closest friends in the world, and the last thing I wanted to do was to make a movie without Michael Rooker in the future. I almost didn't do Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 because there was no Michael Rooker in it, and I couldn't see making the movie without him. He means that much to me, and I love him that much. And it was the hardest choice I've ever had to make from a storytelling perspective, to choose to have Yondu die. I wrote a bunch of treatments where Yondu did not die. There were other endings. He was saved at the last minute after, taking this sacrificial stance, and I wrote many drafts like that. And I realized I was being dishonest. That was not what this story was. For me, the most important thing in making a movie is to tell the truest and most honest story possible, and that's whether you're making a $500,000 indie film or a $200 million spectacle film. And the truth of this story, this was about a father's true and ultimate love for his son. This is a movie who was about who really are our fathers, who really are our siblings. And the only way for it to be an honest story was for Yondu to die. And anything else would have been half measures and would have been me backing out because I was afraid to tell the truth. And so that's why Yondu dies. And I've been very grateful for all of the messages from people all over the world who are adopted, who have stepfathers and foster fathers, and what this movie has meant to them. And people who have had difficult relationships with their imperfect fathers in general. Is it safe to say the original Groot actually did die? Yes, in some ways, yes, yes, yes. Cat, I'm trying to read your. God, you guys are so many questions. The scene around Rocket and Yondu jumping around in space is one of the funniest and trippiest scenes that I have had the pleasure of seeing in IMAX. I agree. I think that scene is hilarious. I really laugh hard watching that scene. I love seeing Kraglin's big eyeball coming out and the shot with Yondu's face and the big, huge mouth screaming is, to me, the funniest shot in the movie. People have asked, is this inspired by Large Marge and Pee Wee Herman's film? And yes, it is. But I just thought it was very funny to see all this crazy stuff happening. So I can't remember quite where it originated, but it happened pretty early on. Are there any big moments you were hoping to add that weren't able to make the cut for whatever reason? I think besides cutting Adam Warlock from the movie, there were no real big moments that didn't make the cut. There was one action sequence I wrote that was a bit more, it took too long to tell, that I would maybe like do at a future time in some other movie. But some of these things never even made the screenplay. They were simply in the treatment. Is Rooker, are you out there? After the self-reflective sequence between Yondu and Rocket, do you see Rocket becoming more aware of the consequences of his actions moving forward? Yeah, Rocket's going to change from this movie. And I think that we still, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen in Rocket. He's an incredibly damaged character who doesn't know how to take in any sort of affection. And although he's learned in small doses to be able to love these people around him, he's not really a hero in the same way some of the other characters, in the way Gamora or Quill are. He really is, he has love for his friends, but it's not so much for the greater world or universe or galaxy. Why did you use the chain? The chain I chose simply because I think it's a great song about both a bond and the difficulties of that bond. And we get to use it twice in the movie, once in a sort of negative sense where they're breaking up, and once in a sort of positive sense where there's no way that anybody is going to break that chain. So I thought it worked perfectly. Yeah, I think it's also important to add that Adam Warlock will not be in Infinity Wars. That is a spoiler for Adam. At the end, we are teasing Adam Warlock. He will have a future in the MCU, but will it be within Infinity War? It will not. It's not. It's just not going to be the case. They made me promise to spread the word on that when I added Adam Warlock to the end of the movie. So that people aren't expecting him in Infinity War. So spread the word so there's no people letting down with expectations. Will there ever be a director's cut, or do you think you told the exact story you set out to do? Asked Dustin. That is a director's cut. What you saw in the theater is a director's cut. Marvel never asked me to change anything. There is one small beat in the movie in which Kevin Feige and I disagreed on. He thought the beat should be cut, and I thought the beat should stay. It's incredibly unimportant. but I think it's important to note because it's the only thing we really, at the end of the day disagreed on. And he let me have my way with keeping the moment in the movie, which I think was the right move. Thank you, Kevin. So yeah, it is a director's cut. There's nothing about that film that is not mine, and to put out a director's cut would be dishonest. How many Guardians of the Galaxy films are we expecting here? With this iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy, there will be 3 movies. So the next movie is the final film for this iteration of the Guardians. Marvel characters don't tend to stay dead for long, so will Yondu make a comeback? No. Yondu is dead. And I think it's very important that in these movies that there are stakes within the films. I am not into this old school way of doing things where you kill characters and then you bring them back and then you kill them again and you bring them back and their deaths mean nothing. Yondu is dead. It's sad, but I'm not, now there could be a prequel Yondu film or there could be a flashback or something like that. So Yondu could exist in the past, but he's not going to come back to life so long as I'm involved with Marvel. It's just not going to happen. These deaths need to have ramifications. These deaths need to be honest. His death needs to mean something, not only in this movie, but in future movies. So he's dead. What did I forget to film during Peter's eulogy to Yondu and had to shoot the next day? Okay, so I didn't forget to shoot anything. The question has to do with this. I shot Chris Pratt's eulogy speech at the end of the movie. Chris did a great job. He did exactly what I directed him to do. I went home that night and I thought, there's something not right about the eulogy. And I realized he wasn't ravaged enough. He wasn't distraught. I think I kind of thought of directing the scene as if he was giving a eulogy at a regular funeral, like, a week or 2 weeks after the person died. And you know how people are like at those funerals. They keep things together and then they start to crack. And that's more how the eulogy was delivered. But I realized that his father had just died out in space, probably a couple of hours ago. And that's when this funeral was taking place. And so he's destroyed. And I went back in and I told Chris that I wanted to shoot the scene again, which was a terrible conversation to have because he worked really hard on the scene. And it was emotionally wearing for him to do it. And it was a lot of dialogue. But I had to say, Chris, I really think that we need to do the speech again. So the next day I went back, or 2 days later or whatever, I went and I reshot the whole speech with Chris. And he did some of the best acting, if not the best acting I've ever seen him do on film. So I'm really happy that I did that. And by that same, there's a similar story I can tell you about Sylvester Stallone. And I went over to Sylvester Stallone's house the other night. We hung out, we talked about movies, we watched some of Rambo together, and talked about that. But one of the reasons why I love Sylvester Stallone is because in the speech between Yondu and Sly, when they're yelling at each other in Contraxia, Sly came in, he killed it. A lot of times actors hold back and they don't yell when you want them to yell, and they're all trying to be really cool, and he didn't do that. He completely went for the jugular, and I appreciate it. I thought it was great. But there was one line at the end where it just didn't hit right. And Sly said to me, "Do you have it? You strike me as a perfectionist. Are you sure you have it?" And it's Sylvester Stallone. I'm a little intimidated. And so I said, yeah, I have it. And I thought maybe I did have it, I went home that night. It was a Friday. And I thought, oh, God, I didn't get that line the way I want to get it. I have to reshoot Sylvester Stallone. I have to ask him on Monday to reshoot a scene. Sylvester Stallone, the person who is an icon to me more than any actor I've ever worked with before, because I, loved him when I was a kid, and I was dreading this moment of having to call talk to Sly on Monday morning and say, can we just reshoot this one line from the scene we already did? And I didn't want to have to do it. Sunday morning, Saturday passes, I'm all worked up. Sunday morning, my phone rings at 10 a.m. It's an unlisted number. I answer it. Hey, James, it's Sly. And he said to me, something that felt off about that last line in that scene we shot on Friday. I was wondering if you could do me a favor and if we could reshoot the scene or reshoot the line. And I, played dumb, and I said, okay, Sly, if you want to. So that is the reason to me that Sylvester Stallone is Sylvester Stallone. He didn't become an icon by accident. It's because he knows exactly, he has a feeling about what works and what doesn't, and that was where he really came through. And it's great to know that an actor or any sort of person that you're working with has your back like that. And so Sly didn't even know. So I went and I reshot it the next day. It was awesome. And Sly didn't even know until Tuesday night that I had done that, that I was going to reshoot it anyway. Oh no, let's see. Oh my gosh. Was there anything you wanted to do in this movie and couldn't? I don't think so. I think I did everything I wanted to do. How did Quill get back in the guardianship with Yondu's dead body? Rocket and Drax came out in spacesuits and got them shortly after they died. They were shooting up into space and they were searching around for them in the spaceship. And we actually shot a moment where Chris is holding on to Yondu's body and crying, and Dave Bautista comes up behind Quill and sort of embraces him and pulls him back from the body as he's holding on to it. And Rocket takes Yondu's body as its arms outstretched, and they move back towards the ship. But I found that the movie moved better without all of that in there, even though I really liked the moment between Drax and Quill. So no one in the MCU has ever seen a Kurt Russell movie? Oh, because Kurt Russell is, I don't know, maybe Kurt Russell looks different in the MCU. Who knows? So is David Hasselhoff going to return in the next movie? Oh, I don't know. I love the Stan Lee cameo. What made you think of the cameo for him? Well, I actually read, the Marvel fan sites and the Marvel message boards out there, and a lot of times people have ideas that are somewhat off base or silly or whatever. But one thing I found very funny and interesting was the fact that people thought Stan Lee is a watcher, who in the comics they just watch everything, and that all of these cameos that he's doing are part of him being a watcher. So I thought that was one of the greatest things that the fans came up with. So Stan Lee, as a guy who is either a watcher or probably a guy who's working for the Watchers, was something that I thought was fun for the MCU. And yes, I know I made a mistake. So people have written and asked me, and I'll own up to my mistake, because Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 theoretically happens in 2014, which is before Infinity War. And Stan Lee in the movie says, that time I was a FedEx guy, which is what he is in Civil War. And I screwed up. I wasn't thinking. That's all that is. But I'm going to say that probably Stan Lee used the guise of a FedEx guy more than one time. So it doesn't really, it's a mistake, but it can be easily explained away. When on the day with Stan, what I did was I just kept yelling out different things that he had done in the different cameos, including I was a DJ at I was a DJ at a strip club. That time I was a DJ at a strip club, which is what he was in Deadpool, which I thought would have been interesting because that would have sort of slightly linked the Fox and MCU universes. What made me think of all those multiple scenes at the end? I just I know that you guys like the multiple scenes. I love the fact that we can get people to sit through the credits. So doing a bunch of them was fun to me. They're all little footnotes. I find that fun, and I just thought it was fun. In the scene on Contraxia, when they roll out the blue carpet, was it supposed to get stuck like that, or did you just keep filming through? No, it definitely was in the script that it got stuck. That was a lot of different angles on something. So do we see Tony Stark getting some MP3 player to Peter Quill with 1,000,000 songs? No. In Infinity War, no. Spoiler for Infinity War. The tree retains memory despite its loss of appendages. Right? Why did Groot lose his memory? Because it's just not the way that Groots procreate. That's not the way they continue on. Is Ego's essence still alive on other planets? It's definitely not alive on other planets. It's gone. It died on all those other planets. Are we going to see more alien races in Guardians 3? Yes. Did I intentionally take the batteries off the bomb in some trailers to avoid spoilers, or were they unfinished special effects? Those, I didn't take them off intentionally. The shots just weren't finished yet. So when you finish shots for the trailer, they're not finished for the movie. They're early drafts of the shots. That's why if you see like the shot when Drax jumps into the obelisk's mouth, it looks much, much better in the movie than it did in the first trailer. And it looks, better in the commercial that it's shown in than it did in the first trailer. If Marvel had full movie rights to all of its characters, specifically Galactus and Silver Surfer, would the Guardians movies have changed at all? It's hard to say. I'm going to guess no, but who knows what characters I would have chosen to use. I think that there's a good chance that if we had all of those characters, that I really like the character of Annihilus, and if my dog's trying to get in, and if there's a chance that I would have done Annihilus as a villain in one of the movies. Yeah, so maybe some of the characters would change, but I think that the central ones would stay the same. Yes, Rooker really did fall asleep during the funeral scene. In fact, I have some very funny video of Chris giving his speech and crying, and then in the middle of that, Rooker falling asleep. And he didn't fall asleep once. He fell asleep like 10 times. And I have tons of footage of him snoring as he's covered in all that stuff, which is crazy. What are the 4 movies worth of Stan Lee cameos you filmed? That isn't what I filmed. I filmed 3 Stan Lee cameos. How did Ego give Meredith a brain tumor exactly? Ego has a certain amount of control over the molecules, which is explained in the movie, and that's exactly how he gave her cancer. And then the person goes on to say, if he wanted to kill her in order to get over her, why didn't he just kill her on the spot? And the reason is because if he killed her on the spot, then Peter Quill would have never been born. He impregnated her, gave her cancer, and then left. And he probably did that to everyone. Was there any time at which Ego would introduce himself as Jason in the script? No. Who was your favorite new character to write into and direct the movie? Definitely Mantis. I love the character of Mantis. She's very fun to write. I relate to her a lot, and I think she's an utterly unique character. Are you happy you might have helped Microsoft finally sell some Zunes? I don't think they're producing Zunes anymore, and I don't think Microsoft wanted us to bring up Zunes. In fact, I know they didn't, because we told them that we were going to put the Zune in the movie, and they just wanted to stay away as far from us as possible. When Volume 3 comes out, will we see the soundtrack not being released on cassette? Would love it released on Zune. Okay, that would be weird, but yeah. Okay, you know, it's pretty funny because I have actually, I think for Rainforest Trust, and they don't know this, I'm going to auction off a Zune. I have a Zune that's signed by everyone in the cast, I think I'm going to auction that off for Rainforest Trust, a brown Zune, like the Zune at the end of the movie. I bought a few of them up. Why did I decide to have Rocket crying as the last shot of the film? For me, that's a moment where Rocket sees the possibility of something beyond the existence that he has known his entire life, which has been one without magic and one without life and one without love. And in that moment, he also sees, especially, that Yondu is okay. And when he sees Yondu's arrow appear in the ashes, I think he feels a great deal of guilt over making the choice to let Yondu do what Yondu did, which is sacrifice himself. And I think he's the only Guardian that ever would have made that choice. He's a more practical member of the Guardians, and that's why Yondu allowed him to do it. And that's why Rocket also, you know, knocked Gamora out and stopped her from going out and dying as well. And so for me, you know, a lot of the center of Guardians of the Galaxy is about Rocket and his relationship to life and the way he sees it. And that's what that moment was. And that's why it was so important. Might I add that the credits for this film were the most entertaining ending credits I've ever sat through. The 80s album cover art style was so awesome to look at. That was Swarovski. They did that. That was I love those ending credits. I think it's great that you know, Marvel allowed us to make ending credits that were, you know, more expensive than just the usual scroll, and that were something, you know, that were interesting to watch throughout. And yes, for many people who have asked, of all the different people dancing in the end credits, yes, one of them is Grandpa Quill, and yes, one of them is Jeff Goldblum, who will be seen in Thor Ragnarok. Also, another little moment is, if you notice in the movie, that there is, Grandpa Quill appears in the film. He's driving a Ford as it is smashed and almost destroyed by the wave, but it isn't quite destroyed. It's Greg Henry, my old friend in old man makeup, and I'm not sure that's the last that we have seen of Grandpa Quill. The Yondu Mary Poppins scene was amazing, but when writing the script, did you have other Disney choices besides Mary Poppins? No, I didn't even really think that Mary Poppins was Disney when I wrote the scene. It was simply that I knew that if Yondu was coming down on an arrow, that he probably would look like Mary Poppins. It was not the most heroic holding your arm up like this, holding onto an arrow as you're flying down. It just seemed that he would look like Mary Poppins, and I think that Quill would think that was funny and say something to him, and I think that that Chris Pratt, added a lot of warmth to that scene, and of course Rooker's reading of "I'm Mary Poppins, y'all" is people's favorite thing in the movie, and at least the most quoted thing in the movie. I have a bunch of outtakes of him saying, I'm Mary Poppins, followed by a billion different things, including a lot of really terrible curse words. But it's very, very funny if you watch them all in a row, and I hope that they appear on the Blu-ray like I asked them to put them on there. Thank you for using Swedish music in Guardians 1. Really made you and the movie a big word of mouth over Swedish radio and TV. I am a huge fan of Swedish music. I count, Money Brother and The One That Dies and Savannah Hot Nights as some of my favorite bands, and some of the greatest music in the world, greatest pop music in the world is out of Sweden. Any chances of seeing Cosmo or a Bug in future movies? Of course. I mean, listen, you saw little nods to Howard and Cosmo at the end. Those are two characters I like a lot. I, of course, like animals, so of course I like Cosmo. I have a lot of say, yes, in Infinity War. I'm not going to say what scene Kevin Feige and I never disagreed on a scene. We disagreed on one moment, one beat, about 10 seconds of film that he wanted to cut and I didn't. And I'm not going to say what it is, because if it's something people love, then Kevin will look bad. And if it's something people hate, then I'm going to look bad. And I don't want either one of us to look bad. I want both of us to look wonderful. So I will never share it. How does Peter understand Teen Groot at the end of the film? Not Teen Groot, again, it's adolescent Groot or tween Groot. Either one is acceptable. He's not yet a teenager. He's literally not a teenager, but he's also not really a teenager in terms of his development. I don't know. I think that we need to think about that a little bit. I know why he understands them, but I think that there's a reason for it. Any possibility Robert Downey Jr. will star in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? No. Was there a particular scene that didn't make the final cut you would have liked to keep in that didn't work? There's one scene I actually liked, and we didn't cut many scenes out of the movie. I mean, pretty much because the screenplay was pretty tight early on, it just kind of stayed from beginning to end what it is. But there's one scene I really liked in the movie because it was funny, but it didn't really further the plot. And it was when the Guardians first arrive on Ego's planet with Ego, and they're approaching his palace. And, Ego shows them that he has this statue that he's prepared. It's covered with this fountain, and the waters fall, and we see this statue that he's made in preparation for them coming. And it's a statue that looks almost like a Frank Frazetta painting with a heroic Star-Lord sitting there looking really cool and great. But obviously, over the telephone game of the universe, the rest of the Guardians look really pretty terrible. So Gamora's like this buxom woman, like holding on to his leg, looking up at him lovingly. And somehow Drax and Rocket have become he's gotten them confused, and they've been one thing. So there's like a little Drax standing on his shoulder with a raccoon tail, and then Groot looks like a large Brussels sprouts, and that's what they see. And Peter Quill thinks this is the greatest statue, and everyone else is not very impressed by it. Any possibility? No, as I said, Yondu is spoilers. This is all spoilers here. Yondu's dead. He's dead. Don't you think Groot was useless in the movie? He saved the universe. He saved the entire universe. How was he useless? I don't understand. Was it difficult to get Howard the Duck in? No, I think he just kind of made his way in. Also, I felt the Pac-Man bit was a risk that paid off in a big way. Was that scene hard to convince people to get in the movie? No. I think those guys really liked Pac-Man. In fact, I have to say they stuck with Pac-Man for a long time, as did I. I was starting to have my doubts because the early versions of that visual effect just didn't look that good. And so we went through a lot of versions where Pac-Man didn't work, and it wasn't cool, and it wasn't funny, and it wasn't cool, and I didn't like it. And then all of a sudden, boom, it came together, and people loved it. How do you figure out a soundtrack for a movie like Guardians? As you write or in post, it's all written into the screenplay. Can we expect the statue scene on Blu-ray? Yes, I think that will be on Blu-ray. But it's not going to have very good effects. Why didn't this movie connect with the big Avengers movie? Because this movie is about itself, and it's about the Guardians, and it's not about setting up an Avengers movie. These movies are centered around themselves and will continue to be so. Is there anything you wish you would have not cut in hindsight? No, I don't think so. I mean, there might be moments or beats or a look or a joke, but definitely nothing, it's pretty, everything in there is kind of necessary. Why didn't you show that much of Xandar in the Nova Corps in Volume 2? Because it revolved around a different place other than Xandar. I would have loved to see a little bit of those features again, since those are some of the features that made us fans love the first movie. But practically, that's not true. That really isn't the people's favorite location from the first movie. People's favorite location from the first movie would have been, nowhere in some of the other places, less than Xandar. Will we ever get a remastered Howard the Duck movie? You mean a remake of Howard the Duck? No. I mean, there could someday be a Howard the Duck movie. Remastered Howard the Duck, you mean like, I don't know what you mean by that. Was there ever a discussion to introduce Rocket's girlfriend into Volume 2? I don't, listen, in the comics, Rocket sometimes has a girlfriend who's a completely different species than he is, which, is somewhat strange. I think that one of the primary things about Rocket in the MCU is he doesn't have a connection. And I think the sure sign of sometimes these movies going downhill is introducing unnecessary love interest, especially to someone who can't even connect to other people as friends. Do I know who the bad guy will be in Guardians 3? Yes. If you want to think of, yeah. Yondu didn't look like the best father figure in the first movie. Well, how come he changes so much? I don't know how much he really changes. I mean, how much, I think a lot of the stuff in Volume 2 isn't stuff that is changing. It's stuff that was true all along. The relationship between Nebula and Gamora, a lot of that stuff between them has been true all along. The stuff between Yondu and Quill was an asshole at the beginning. He ripped off Yondu. He stole an idea from him and went off to do it. So Quill's not the best son in the world either. And there's a lot of things that are probably, through a character's perspective. We see things through the perspective of Peter Quill. But we also see very clearly in the first movie that Yondu, in a moment, when he takes that orb from Quill at the end of the movie, we know that Yondu knows that's not the stone. He knows it. And Michael Rooker plays that brilliantly. And when he goes back on the ship and he opens it up, he can't open that. If there's a power stone in there, if he opened it up, it would destroy him. But he opens it up, and there's a troll doll inside, and he knows that he doesn't have the stone. So I think in the first movie we see very much that Yondu cares for his son and is, willing to take, put himself in jeopardy to protect him. Oh no, how do I do this? I've lost my things. All right, well, anyway, guys, it's been over an hour. Thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't answer more, but I love all you guys, and thank you for your continued support with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's a movie I really love, and I love that it's affecting so many of you all over the world. And have an amazing, amazing day.